Hi, everyone. My name is Kristin Snowden. I'm a marriage and family therapist in the state of California. I have a background with, I worked under Rob Weiss with drug and sex addiction, but I also, in my private practice, I kind of deal with a lot of less acute, just marital and relational struggles. So the past several webinars, I've been kind of trying to devote it to a discussion of how do we change our circumstances? How do we change the things around us? Because, this relationship as it stands right now, I'm unhappy. This isn't working for me. There's a lot of hurt. Maybe there's a lot of disconnection. I feel alone. I feel unsafe. And we're trying to figure out ways to change that pattern. I talk a lot in the first several webinars about how our brain really doesn't like change. We fight it with everything in us because our brain likes to have just really simple, basic neural pathways that we go over through the same pattern. Even if that pattern is insanity, we still prefer it. And then there's a thing that we try to change through just behavioral changes of, okay, well, maybe if I do X, Y, and Z, then things will be better. So maybe what if I lose weight, or if I get that promotion, or if I go to church more, or if I ask him or her how her day is more often, then things will be better. But so the most recent webinars, I've been talking about some of the 12 steps, or the way I explain it, kind of my interpretation and my perception of how I perceive the 12 steps. Because it is a program for change, and it's not just a program for behavioral changes, which I think a lot of times 12 steps is considered kind of like this legalistic black and white. I even see comments under my YouTube channel about, AA is a cult, or 12 steps is a cult. And sometimes people's experiences are different. I've personally had, though I don't identify as an addict, I've found the 12 steps to be a pivotal part of my life, and has changed the way I look at things, the way I approach challenges, the way I experience stress and conflict and adversity in my life. And so I've been trying to share that information with everybody. So just to really recap, we've gone through steps 1 through 4 already, which is we admitted that we have a problem, that whatever's going on right now is not working for us, and that our lives have become unmanageable because of it. 2 is that we came to believe that, look, I'm definitely not the one in control here, that maybe there's this power, this higher power, universal intelligence, the ocean, who knows, whatever you want to define it as, some form of spirituality, that that entity can restore us to our sanity, because we cannot do it. And then asking another flawed person to help us is also going to fall short, because we're all flawed human beings. 3rd is that we've made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to this higher power as we understand this higher power, whether it's a God or something other than that. And then the step 4 is making a fearless and searching moral inventory of ourselves. So kind of really deeply exploring our good, our bad, our light, our dark, what makeup makes us us. And it's kind of a way of facing a lot of our fear and shame. And so I'm going to try to explore steps 5, 6, and 7 today to kind of finish off this discussion. Which 5 is that we've admitted to this higher power and to other human beings the exact nature of our wrongdoings. So basically, I feel like step 5 is a complement to step 4. Well, let's just even say complements through step 1 through 4, because we've done all this kind of deep, rigorous work of figuring out who we are. Okay, these are things that make me really great, but wow, this is the way I fall short. These are the ways that, maybe harm has been done to me, and I hold these resentments against me. And I'm in deep pain because of these things. And I can own that and explore that. But at the same time, I can say, but these are also the ways in maybe other completely different categories of my life that I too fall short. That sometimes I'm not the greatest parent, or I lose my temper, or I'm just flawed in different ways. And it's just kind of, but these are the ways that I'm really great, my generosity, my consideration, etc. And so it's interesting because step 5, which honestly, it's kind of ahead of its time in research. I mean, these steps were developed long ago, but now there's just so much more research that's basically showing that we are neurobiologically made to connect to other people. So when I've said this in many different webinars, but I'll say it again, lots of feel-good hormones come out when we're in connection with other people, when we're having that deep talk, when we are doing well in something, like we get a promotion or we get accolades or affirmations that you're doing a good job. Lots of feel-good hormones come out when we're having sex, when we're holding a baby, because it's saying, this is what we need. This is good. Keep this going. Conversely, a lot of negative, yucky emotions come out when we are in disconnection, when we are in shame or fear or hurt about something, when someone has harmed us, if we get rejected or fired, or we feel neglected or in an argument with somebody. So I think step 5 is really interesting because it's just kind of acknowledging that when we are in connection with people, good things happen, and when we're in disconnection, we suffer. And a part of admitting our flaws and accepting ourselves, kind of warts and all, that process, so that step 4 would be incomplete if we did it on our own, if we did it in an isolated state. Because the next step has to be that we show ourselves and we connect with others as part of the continued rediscovery and healing process of our own. Hearing other stories changes us. Sharing our story changes us. And we're talking again about neurobiology and the neural pathways, how we love, like our brain's lazy and it loves the same, pathway over and over again. When you speak your shame, when you speak the way I fall short, the way that I struggle, the things I'm not proud of, when I share embarrassing stories, that actually brings it back from the kind of non-communicative part of our brain up to our prefrontal cortex, where we can bring in rational thought, where we can bring in, that felt really gross and bad, but now that I've talked about it, maybe it's not that horrible. And just a quick anecdote, I was just doing a couples session earlier today, and this couple was talking about how a lot of their friends were sharing, kind of giving them a call, saying that they're in a marital struggle as well. And the wife was saying, it's really interesting when my friend tells me these stories about the problems that she's having with her husband, I hear myself in that story, and I say, wow, that's the way I used to think. That's the way I used to go about it. But now from the outside looking in, when I'm, not invested in the outcome because it's not my relationship and I can kind of look outside in, I hear that story so differently. And that's just the kind of the linchpin about why connecting with other people, why sharing your story with others can be such a monumental change, such a pivotal change in your soul, in who you are, because you hear it so differently when you're speaking it or hearing it than when it's all muddled back there in the darkness of your brain. So, Brene Brown says that you must speak your shame, because the shame, this fear of I'm not enough, or the fear of these flaws make me unlovable, it thrives in the secrecy and darkness. But it cannot survive when it is spoken, shared with others, and then received with empathy by others. So Richard Rohr comments about step 5, you cannot heal from what you don't acknowledge. Not acknowledging your shortcomings or your struggles allows it to seep into your unconscious. And then, of course, that's where the defensiveness comes from, and that denial and that minimization, or maybe it's your fault that I'm like this. So that's kind of what I have to say about step 5. And the idea is that when you share it with a higher power and others, is that it's kind of this idea that instead of being punished and shamed, and hopefully if we punish you enough for being a bad person and we shame you and make it clear that you're a bad person, if we hear your story with love and forgiveness and me too, I'm flawed, and I'll love you in spite of your flaws. If you can love me in spite of my flaws, that'll encourage a restoration. So like a restorative justice. So that's step 5. Step 6 is we are entirely ready to have our higher power remove all of these defects of our character. So don't forget, four, we kind of went through that fearless inventory of all of our stuff that we struggle with. 5 is we're sharing it with everybody else. My guess is during that process, you're adding to the list of my good and bad, right? Because we're rumbling with humans, and then we're rumbling with our higher power. And so that list gets longer. And then at step 6, we say, okay, we've come to a place where we're ready to ask our higher power to remove these defects of character. And I think that this is a step where we might lose a lot of people, because I can imagine people's reaction to this step after reading it, after reading the first 5 and then getting to step 6 and going, okay, so I've spent all this time figuring out that I have a very serious problem. I'm surrendering to the fact that I'm incapable of managing this problem on my own, that I'm in my own state of severe struggle. I create this really scary list of all the ways that I'm flawed and resentful and angry. And then this like higher powers going to kind of sprinkle his or her fairy dust on me and wipe it all away. Like what came up for me is like, do I need to like say a special chant or like have a special seance? Like what exactly happens that makes this suddenly be the moment where I get relief from all this madness? And then the other questions that I think come up is more like anger and resentment of like, okay, so why now? Why after these first 5 steps? Why couldn't they have been removed sooner? And just all this personal struggle that I could see come from that. But step 6 acknowledges that we first have to see and explore and share all the things that might have contributed to the problem, right? So even if you have been victimized yourself and you're in a state of hurt and struggle, that hurt and struggle and victimization can all still be excuses or obstacles, I should say, to your healing, to transcending this crisis. And before we can fully surrender to the fact that only a power greater than ourselves can actually remove and heal these problems. The grace and relief comes when we accept accountability and responsibility for our stuff, what's ours, our step 4 stuff, but then also let go of what is not ours. That's where the grace and relief come from. Richard Rohr asserts that in order to fully acknowledge that we are in fact extremely imperfect and struggle with powerlessness, but then surrender it to a higher power, demonstrates kind of a higher level of consciousness. So basically, I wonder if perhaps it's that final act of surrendering and faith that keeps our ego in check and stops you for this moment from taking control back again. And a higher power cannot do anything without being invited to kind of come into your life and kind of search around and help you. Step 7 goes often hand in hand, obviously, with step 6, which is that we humbly ask our higher power or God or whatever that is to remove our shortcomings. So I think when we hear humbly asking this higher entity, sometimes the words like prayer or meditation come to mind. So you're not asking others and your higher power to change. You're instead asking to be changed by this higher power. Prayer or meditation or developing a relationship with your higher power may be that kind of symbiotic relationship that allows you to not control this world and your world around you, but to connect with the higher power and kind of sit with and figure out with this relationship with a higher power what needs to be changed within you. You know, what shortcomings need to be removed within you. We cannot engineer our own transformation. So meaning we can't kind of sit at the table and be like, okay, this is the mathematical equation. I have a problem. These are my shortcomings. These are the things that I need to get rid of. And these are the things that I need to get better at. Because, well, A, we can't be the engineers of that because our best thinking got us here in the first place. Our own program for happiness, whatever we thought was working and whatever we thought was the right way, has led us here. So we need to kind of realize that. And then B, if we're the ones developing that magical equation of, okay, this will bring me joy and contentment and happiness, it will just by self-definition be a self-centered and flawed structure, because that's what we are by default, self-centered and flawed. It's just how we are. So Richard Rohr kind of says, you making all these conversions is basically like an alcoholic saying, okay, alcoholism isn't working for me, but I'm going to make a very specific definition of what sobriety looks like. These are the rules that I'm going to follow, and this is the way that it has to be, right? So again, it's that behavioral change, not the soul, deeper, intrinsic change that changes everything, that changes the whole game. This is meant to complement all the steps where we allow our higher power the opportunity through surrendering and humbleness to reveal to us what parts of our lives do need to be changed, what really is working and what's not working, what needs to be altered, transformed. It's definitely a great act of faith and a ton more surrendering that we open our hearts and our minds and try to let go of what our will is, our plan, what we think we need to be, what we think we should be doing, and connect with a higher power, whatever that might be, to allow an organic, intrinsic kind of soulful change happen. A higher power's process of removing shortcomings, Richard Rohr says this to finish this up, a higher power's process of removing one's shortcomings is to fill up the hole with something much better, more luminous, and more satisfying. Then your shortcomings that did exist, they're not exactly like driven away or pushed underground, right? Which is what like doing behavioral changes, kind of surface changes do. They'll just drive away. Oh, I don't like this part of me, so I'm just not, I'm going to do a replacement to this instead. So that drives them away and pushes them underground. But doing these soul deep changes with the connection of a higher power, and instead it exposes our shortcomings and then just starves them, basically. Starved for the false program for happiness that they are. This is when your true self is supposed to be coming out, right? And that's what we're shooting for. So again, that's kind of finishing up exploring the various steps of the 12-step program for a program for change. I would love for you to be looking at how these different steps might apply to your own life. Read different material on 12 steps, interpretations of 12 steps, and kind of look at the big picture. If the concepts of 12 steps scare you, then try to pull out of it and look at it more conceptually. What are they trying to say here? It was really interesting. I'll close with this last comment. I have a client who had really hard time staying sober from drugs and alcohol for years, lots of relapses. She's now pulled together 1 year of clean time, and she's doing the 12 steps hardcore.
Yay.
And I said, I'm just curious, but do you know, part of her working the steps and being in the rooms for a full year, she's around people who have a lot of really high quality recovery, and then the people who kind of dip their toe in it, struggle with it, think it's a cult, whatever. And I said, I'm just curious, from your observations from the past year, does anyone who has like true, healthy, high quality recovery, so they're living a life that you're like, I want to go to there, I like this, do any of them have it without some kind of spirituality, some kind of connection and some kind of understanding that there's this higher power. And she just immediately said no. And by the way, this is someone who she herself is struggling with what her higher power is. She's really in that place where she's not sure what it's supposed to look like, how it's supposed to be in her life, and she's still struggling. But all she knows is she sees these other people, and she just knows they don't seem to have that without some kind of higher power. And I thought that was just really, really interesting and powerful. So that's it for the lecture.
Great stuff. You know, I love the stuff. So I'm like, whoa. So, okay. So on step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. I so believe in step 4, and I think a lot of people actually get really hung up on step 4 because they're like freaking out that I'm gonna have to write this stuff down and the shame and all that. But say they do get to that, then the next piece is sharing it with someone else. And I really do believe that was where my true healing started, was the opportunity to share with somebody who didn't freak out and go, oh my God, you're the worst person ever. It really helped me identify patterns of what was going on for me. Like they could point through things and go, oh, I see that you have, like these 3 things kind of all tied together. Have you looked at that? The other thing was, they went, oh, all of those things are just typical female alcoholic, because that's what I identify most primarily with, and I was like, oh, okay, so there's a reason why. It's not an excuse, but there's a reason why I did all these things.
Right.
And I honestly feel like I left I've done a couple of really in-depth 4th and 5th steps. And then some other ones that are more, I'm going to do one on this area, and then I do the maintenance steps, which are, are 10, 11, and 12. But anyway, with that, the freedom that came from that, the dropping off the baggage that weighed 1,000 pounds of, my past and the shame and all of that, it just really helped. I honestly believe I would have relapsed. And I don't think that there was a way I could have stayed sober had I not done 4 and 5 in particular. So those were really powerful for me. I do think I loved what you're talking about with the stuff is in the back of our heads where there's no light, but there's also no rational thinking. And the example that you shared, that when you heard your story, or the client heard the story from someone else, it lends perspective. I think that that's what the point of all these connections are, whether it's a 12-step group or drop-in groups or whatever, because you get to share something. I've always said the scariest place in the world is this area right in between here. If something gets caught in there, and it's probably back here, but if something gets caught up here, it's doing the spin, and I'm, and as soon as I share it, first of all, I notice physically that the pressure relieves on me, but also the perspective. Okay. So it's just transformative to be connected to other people and have other input, like you also shared I got myself, and all of us addicts do, get ourselves to the point where we need to go to meetings because of our great thinking. So, we need other people to guide the path. And, I think with 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. I think it's brilliant that it comes after 4 and 5, where you're going, oh my gosh, I've got all this stuff. I think that's probably the time I was the most willing to even look at, because I didn't want to keep carrying that around, and even the humbly asking him, I think for myself, a lot more shortcomings came up. The longer I've been around and the longer I've been in life in general, I'm willing to look at things that were not so glaring. I had to take care of the things that were ginormous first, and then now I can take care of the things that are on a lesser problem, but there's still a problem, and I want to address those. So it's an opportunity to continue to ask for help, on my shortcomings. So, and what you talked about with the example of the person who kept relapsing, and you asked about the spirituality. My favorite step is number 12, where it says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. we're not promised that, you know, everything's going to get wonderful. It's going to, you know, you're going to not use alcohol. You're not going to have a sex addiction problem. You're not promised anything else. It's just that this is a guideline to spiritual awakening, you know. And you also talked about you know, these are the things that I want. Back in the day, all I wanted was to not hurt and to not, you know, act out. So I didn't even know what all I wanted, but like you talked about with the person sitting in the meeting, it's like the people that had what I wanted were the people that had connected and found joy and could laugh at themselves about the crazy stuff that we had done, you know. And, you know, that was, you know, I'm still filled with shame about, you know, oh, I'm so terrible. And it, you know, and I'm not good or bad. It's just like I did some things that, you know, I can't even regret, because like they got me to where I am. So I understand that those are part of my journey. You know, I've done my best to, you know, heal the relationships and do the things I needed to do. But, you know, I don't even regret those things that I did, because I'm so happy with what has happened in my life. And the only reason is because I was shown this path through the 12 steps. I couldn't have done it. You know, I didn't have these life tools, which like you're identifying, you're not an addict, but you're finding them to be useful life tools, you know, to help you have a life that is in transition, in a change, that you're open to the change with the, you know, with the guidance of these kind of tools. So I do get resentful when people call it a cult, but I also go, you know, not everybody's open-minded and it's not going to be for everybody. But, you know, for those of us that didn't get life right off the bat, this is a path and it's worked for a lot of people. So everybody gets to choose. I like to fill the hole with satisfying things, because that really resonated with me. There was a hole and it was huge, and I was trying to stuff it with, you know, one addiction or another. And I thought about that too when you said there'd be a replacement, and myself and many other people, if you only stop this behavior, you fill it with another behavior that is also not useful. You know, things where I'm going like, I think that, you know, this is the next thing that's, you know, I'm trying to numb out with food. So, I mean, there's lots of examples like that. It's gambling, whatever it is, sex, it's whatever it is. So really getting to the transformative part where I can change. So I don't have to keep doing let me jump to the next addiction. You know?
Yeah. And again, I like to share my story that, and I've said it before in other webinars, but I've been exposed to 12 steps. I had been for many, many years. And since, again, substance abuse kind of wasn't my thing. I didn't think it applied to me, but I had this kind of blessing of a perfect storm where I was in my own personal struggles. I had some major marital struggles, and I was working with Rob, and he was kind of as part of the mentorship of me working under him, kind of re-teaching me his interpretation of the 12 steps. And I was like, well, that makes way more sense. You know, I can hear that. Yeah. I understand that. And I mean, and it was in those moments where I was like, forget like addiction. We all struggle with kind of just seeking out these inanimate objects, thinking that they're going to fill our soul. Because we haven't done the work to figure out what is our soul and what does truly fill our soul. Or also just kind of going through that insanity pattern of thinking that we're going to get all the validation and worth from being a parent, or from being a partner, or from having a career, because all of those things, while they can be wonderful and fabulous and the highlights of our life, they're too flawed. You know, a partner is a flawed human being. So I'm going to fall short, and he's going to fall short. My children, I adore them, but one thing my aunt made point on the day of my wedding is like, you're only a parent for 18 of those years, you know, like meaning that the children are the central piece of your life for those 18 years that you're raising them, and then they're gone. You know, and obviously you forever have a connection with them and you adore them and they're still an important part of your life. But it would kind of be a scary situation if you were calling them every day. I mean, like, wait, tell me before you get up and go to college, tell me all the reasons that you love me and affirm that I'm doing a good job. That when they'd be in my office. So these kind of things, they're important parts of your life, these external parts of your life, your partnerships, your friendships, your job, your children, they're imperative and they bring you so much joy, but they have their limitations. And that's just kind of what I want to show everybody is it's just addicts get to the limitations faster than the higher functioning people do. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right. Like they do these more obvious things like get DUIs or get drunk or lose their job because they've behaved in a limiting way, a societal limiting way. Higher functioning people that don't have addiction kind of skirt through the societal structures and norms and kind of get away with it a little bit longer before they hit their rock bottom. So
I was kind of thinking of the Wizard of Oz where they're hiding, I've got this facade, so I'm hiding behind the facade
all the time.
But they're, probably just, going, I'm hurrying as fast as I can to try to make sure that the facade stays, just how I want to present it to everybody because I have a perfect husband and children and everything else. So, that's a lot of work too. So.
And that's the other point I want to get across is when I went through these moments, like I didn't even know what I didn't even know. I mean, I look back now and I can use a better language to describe all the ways that I was in struggle and all the choices I was making that weren't right and all my flaws. But if you asked me 10 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, like I screw up, but I'm pretty awesome. Like I don't need anybody to save me. I'm good to go. My marriage is fabulous. We're all great people. That would have been my narrative, and I kind of balk and I laugh now at the level of our protectionism, like how much our brain and our spirits try to like protect ourselves with our defense mechanisms of just denial and yeah, don't pay attention to that man behind the curtain. Like, don't, just pay attention to the flames and the excitement of the Oz up there. And I didn't even realize that I was hustling for my worthiness that whole time and that I still do.
So a follow-up, I cannot change my husband's abusive behavior, but I can change how I deal with it, meaning I can make my own happiness and joy. I can be honest with myself about my role in the relationship, etc. Yeah, and I think that, I think this helps you, the 12 steps can help you, find that path. And for me, I've learned that my happiness is not dependent on my circumstances and, things all going smoothly in my life because gosh, they never do. So, I can have joy, despite what's going on. And I think for me, one of the things that was huge with the 12 steps was learning that everything is temporary. The good things are only temporary and I try to really enjoy them. But if something's really bad, and death is final and things like that. So I get that there are caveats to this, but most of my circumstances are temporary, they're transitional, or my emotions are temporary with it, or there's a way to make it different. And so, just understanding that this doesn't have to be forever, for most things, it's, that has helped me as well. So, and what's your website?
KristinSnowden.com.
Okay.
KristinSnowden.
So yeah,
and you can search me on YouTube under that as well. That's my YouTube channel.
That's great because like all of them that have been recorded, are posted there as well. And there's been some fabulous content that I think you'll find helpful. So, well, thank you all, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Kristin.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining.